Hello, the presentation will begin shortly. Please submit your questions to the Q&A, and if you would like to access the French interpreter, click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Good afternoon, and welcome to Fostering an Inclusive Workplace, part of CCOHS's Safety and Health Week program. To begin, a few Zoom items. Please submit all questions to the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom window. Today's webinar is also offered in French, American Sign Language, and Quebec Sign Language. If you want to hear the presentation in French or access either of the sign language options, you will find an interpretation option at the bottom of your Zoom window where the globe icon is. We put instructions in the chat. A recording of the event will be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. We will send an email to registrants when it's available. I'm Chris Keene, your moderator for today. Before our presentations, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. As we have shared, our speaker panel has changed, so let's start by introducing them. Janet Mannella is CCOHS's Vice President of Operations. Janet brings a wealth of expertise in safety leadership, compliance, employee relations, and workplace investigations. Prior to joining CCOHS, Janet worked at McMaster University as the Faculty of Health Sciences Safety Manager and Manager of Occupational Safety, Security, and Parking Services at Conestoga College, and taught their Health and Safety Certificate program. Please tell us more about yourself, Janet.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone, and bonjour. As Chris indicated, I am the VP of Operations at CCOHS. I have the pleasure of working with an amazing team of technical specialists who help write and develop all the content that you often see on our website. And I take great pride in what we do. I've been in the safety realm for about 20 years and have education, manufacturing, and government background. And so I'm really excited to participate in today's discussion. I know I was the last minute addition, but I appreciate the team for inviting me today. And I look forward to hearing your questions and hoping that we can provide you with some information today that you can take back and execute in your workplace. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks for joining us today, Janet. I'm also pleased to introduce Yvone Defreitas. Yvone is the CCOHS Director of Human Resources and Organizational Effectiveness. As a senior human resources management professional with over 20 years of experience, Yvone provides the center with counsel and expertise, positioning human resources as a business partner. Yvone empowers and supports leadership with the ability to effect positive organizational change through expert advice. Yvone also teaches various continuing education human resources courses at McMaster University. Please tell us more about what you do, Yvone.
Sure, thanks, Chris. As Chris said, I'm the Director of HR with CCOHS. I've actually been with CCOHS for 11 years. I'm responsible for the organization's overall human resources programs and policies, as well as ensuring high quality and consistent service to all employees at the center. And I wouldn't be able to do this without the awesome team in our HR department that support not only myself, the senior leaders, but also every employee in the organization. And I am an instructor and have been for over 14 years, teaching various topics in human resources. My over 20 years of experience in human resources has been in a variety of industries, And I'm a true generalist, if you will, a true HR generalist.
Thank you, Yvonne. A few words about CCOHS. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety is Canada's national resource for the advancement of workplace health and safety. For more than 40 years, CCOHS has promoted the physical and psychological health, safety, and total well-being of workers. We do this by collaborating and engaging stakeholders and providing information, education, tools, and solutions that will help prevent work-related injury and illness to improve the lives of workers. Today, we will be having a conversation about the importance of inclusion in the workplace, how to make space for others, and the role each employee can take part in to create a more safe and healthy work environment. Janet, if you can start us off with what is inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I actually thought I would throw a bit of a curveball and throw this one over to Yvonne just to start us off by providing with a definition of what we think inclusion is. Just from an HR standpoint, so we understand where we're at with inclusion. And then I'm going to add my thoughts on how I think inclusion can be incorporated into an occupational safety program. So Yvonne, maybe just provide the definition of your point of view of inclusion.
No problem, Janet. So I'll start off by saying, if you actually look up the definition of inclusion in the workplace, what you'll see is a statement, something along the lines of a culture where a mix of people come to work, feel comfortable and confident to be themselves, and work in a way that suits them, but also delivers your business products and services. So that's what it is. What it really does is it ensures that everyone feels valued and, more importantly, adds value. I was on a couple of workshops and I was lucky to hear Verna Myers, a leading diversity and inclusion expert, and she really described it in a really good way as to what diversity and inclusion is. So think of diversity as being invited to the party. So you're being asked to participate. And inclusion is being asked to dance. So you're being included at the party, in the party. So I think that's a really good way to look at it from a workplace and getting that idea across. Janet?
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to take that one step further, and I'm just going to add that it's great to be invited to the party, and it's great to be invited to dance. But if it's not a safe environment, you're not going to participate. And so if it's an environment where you feel a little awkward, perhaps there's some tension in the room, you don't want to participate. And so for me, inclusion is about making the workplace safe, and that it includes that it's safe to speak up and share ideas. So, and in particular, ideas around, safety and wellness and mental health. It's important that you prepare an inclusive and judgment-free zone. We practice active listening, which can at times be difficult, empathy and respect. And like all aspects of a comprehensive safety program, it's important for employers to make the effort for prevention of harm, discrimination, harassment, violence. Because when we do that, it creates the space for honest dialogue. It allows for conflict resolution in a safe way, and it makes it comfortable for everyone to want to participate. And so for me, that's the add-on piece from an occupational safety standpoint. And I'm really hoping that, as we move through the dialogue today, everyone will understand that creating that culture of occupational safety in a safe environment extends beyond traditional safety topics. So that's kind of how I view it from that point of view.
And Janet, just to add, you as an organization, you would see that people are coming and they feel safe because they are participating. They are being their authentic selves, and they're not afraid of any kind of any unsafe acts against them.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yvonne, can you speak to where workplaces should start and end in relation to inclusion?
So, Chris, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think it really is important, and sometimes it's not easy, but it starts with management and the employer. You know, you've got HR to help you, but it really starts with the top of the organization. And what does that mean? It means that they have to exemplify those behaviors. And what are those behaviors? Well, again, to add to Janet's point, creating a sense of safety, but not only, you know, for yourself within the organization, but all your teams, your colleagues across the whole organization. So that leadership, the management have to truly believe that it is a safe place, and then you have to embody that. The other point I think is really listen, but listen as an ally. You got to really listen and really listen. And then when you're done listening, engage and be that ally. Not only for that person, but also for the organization to be that, you know, to help create that safe space. And if you're in a unionized workplace, you know, work with the union through labor management meetings and consultation. They may have some feedback from their members that you're not aware of as an organization. So work in partnership, and you work towards getting that really good inclusion in the organization using various things. But it's again about starting with the top down and that commitment.
Yeah, I agree, Yvonne. I think, and from a safety lens, workplaces and workers, we really need to start at the beginning and treat inclusion like any other hazard, right? We approach that, we listen, we look at, data within the organization, we determine what those, gaps are. And then we take a look at what preventative measures can we put in place. And that includes engaging your senior team and making sure that they understand what that is and how to incorporate into the safety program. It's a starting point. We need to include it in the risk assessment, take a look at, how can we prevent that? How do we educate? How do we train? How do we incorporate that into our corporate culture? Psychological health and safety is part of an occupational safety program. And I think for those of us who've been in safety a really long time, it hasn't been part of our traditional safety program. And so we need to ensure that we educate ourselves and we take a look at how to incorporate that within a comprehensive safety program. And recognize that, it is a legislated requirement in some jurisdictions. I mean, it is now ensconced in legislation, in particular in the Canada Labour Code, that it speaks directly to psychological health and safety and the physical safety of workers and workplaces. And if it's not there, in absence, we always refer to the catch-all of do everything reasonable under the circumstances to protect a worker. And that's where we need to ensure that it is part of the safety program. And we do have a duty to ensure that we are creating safe spaces. So I think for me, for me, one thing I always like to say, and you might think this is a bit weird, but I don't think that safety itself is a priority. And I include this in inclusion. You're going to think, wow, it's really weird that she's saying that. The reason I say that is because safety, including inclusion, it should be a core value of your organization, and it should be embedded in every component of your organization. So for me, priorities change. And hotspots come and all these things happen, but it really is a core value of your organization. And that's where your leadership can get involved.
And if I can just add to that, Janet, as I mentioned, it's about listening and, the leadership and the employer listening. And there's various ways that you can get feedback, because when you're asking people to participate, what are the tools out there to get them to participate? Well, I think one of the best tools is your surveys. More than likely, you're going to get honest opinions from your employees about what those challenges and barriers are that they're facing in your workplace and their total work experience. And if you ask the right questions, use a third party so that you can get a wholesome, record or data or feedback. then you can actually use that feedback to help with initiatives to support the inclusion part. But that's a mechanism that could be used to get the feedback. And then you, of course, look at, the safety aspect of it, but getting the feedback, more importantly, communicating back what those initiatives are, how you're actioning on those initiatives, because it's nice to do these things. And yeah, the employer says we're creating a safe space, but they need to see you actually doing it. So
Absolutely.
That's just as important.
Right.
Thank you. Janet, can you tell us about GBA plus and why it's
I can.
important?
Absolutely. So for those of you who maybe don't use that language on a regular day, the acronym of GBA plus is Gender-Based Analysis Plus. It's an analytical process that provides a rigorous method for assessment of systematic inequalities. It allows us to determine or assess how diverse groups of women, men, and gender diverse people may experience policies, programs, and initiatives in workplaces. And the plus component of the GPA acknowledges that GBA plus is not just about the differences between biological, i.e. sex, and social, cultural genders. And so, from a safety standpoint, I like this. And the reason why I like it is because there's a framework. And for those of us who've been in safety in a long time, we're all about frameworks. We're about programs, how to initiate that, what are the components of that program. And this allows you to do a bit of a deep dive from that point of view and take a look at those assessments. You can also incorporate those components of the assessment into your risk assessment in order to determine, mitigating hazard risk situations. So for me, I think you can also include it into job safety analysis. Just think about PPE and the whole initiative about how women don't typically fit into the PPE that's traditionally been in the workplace. So the whole movement about how does that make you feel if you're not included in the workplace when you're supposed to wear PPE to protect yourself, but it doesn't fit and actually creates another hazard. So these are things that allow us to take a look at various factors, and it aligns, in my opinion, this component, the GBA plus, aligns the intersectionality between the processes and how to incorporate those from HR and health and safety, right? So Yvonne, I know we've talked, you and I, about there's sometimes where inclusion or psychological health and safety fits into a safety component, and there's other times where it fits more into an HR component with human rights as opposed to safety legislation. So There's definitely an intersection there. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Just a little bit, just to dovetail off what you just said, and the highlighting the analysis. There may be an opportunity for looking at highlighting systemic issues that are in your in your workplace. So you've got this analysis, but then what is contributing to these things? So it could be systemic issues. You're not aware of. You've done these things for so long. You haven't changed the way, say, a hiring process is done, and it might help highlight where those barriers are and employees are facing that you're not aware of.
Yeah. And I think, stigma is a really big thing, and we need to create that safe space to reduce that stigma and unconscious bias that may already be part of the culture for whatever reason. And so by opening up lines of communication and allowing for a safe space to have those discussions, it makes people feel like they're being heard and they are part of something. We're empowering workers to be able to have those discussions in the workplace. And I think that's a really big thing to include.
I agree.
As part of that.
As leaders, exemplifying those behaviors and at the same token, addressing those behaviors that are not we will not tolerate in the workplace is just as important.
Yeah, I think sometimes people feel uncomfortable having awkward conversations or uncomfortable conversations, but recognize, just like in safety, doing nothing is an action,
Yes.
right? So it's really important that, once a hazard's been brought forward, you have a duty to address it. And so by being silent on it, thinking that it'll just go away or it won't become an additional problem is not a solution.
I think you've heard me say what you permit, you promote. So that goes along with saying nothing, doing nothing, right? So even though you're silent, you may be promoting because of your silence. So that's
Absolutely.
important. Be an ally and speak up.
Janet, what are next steps those attending today can take to implement some of this in their workplace?
Yeah. So I'll take it, I like the plan, do, check, act model. Plan for the future, plan for a comprehensive program, plan to include inclusion as part of your risk assessments, as part of your culture. Safety is embedded in every corner of your organization. And so I think the one good thing that COVID did for us was allow for everyone to understand what the word risk means, right? And so now that everybody sort of has a fundamental understanding of risk, you can really take this opportunity to springboard your program and include psychological health and safety, mental health, inclusion into your programs. And so one thing I also like to say is you don't have to start from ground zero. There's a lot of resources and tools out there to help you get started. And at CCOHS, we have our OSH answers, and I think we're going to share some of those links. It talks about, what is inclusivity in a program and how does that look from the safety standpoint. We also have some tools. We have a tool called Guarding Minds at Work. It's a survey, kind of gives you a point in time so you can sort of see what the flavor is in the organization or what the culture is. And we also, I also recommend a practical toolkit that helps employers build an inclusive workforce. It's developed by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And that's another great way to utilize a tool in your workplace and recognize that it's a journey. This change doesn't happen overnight. It takes a really long time to embed this and to have these open and honest conversations. And again, sometimes it's awkward and it's uncomfortable, but we need to get past that. And I think by recognizing and learning and having buy-in from your leadership and walking the walk and talking the talk and just being an ally, as Yvonne has indicated, that it is a safe space to have those conversations and recognize that you might not be able to make the change today, but something can happen tomorrow. And the more information that we have, the more times we address the gaps in our program, we analyze, we take a look at the hazards, we put, mitigating hazard measure controls in place. It's a starting point. And then from there, we can just continue to grow the program. So I think for me, that's a really great place to start. Yvonne, what are your thoughts?
I'm just going to jump off the point that you made about it being a journey. And it's truly, I think when, from a human resources perspective, when diversity, equity, inclusion, and let's not forget accessibility now, right? At first, it was like, oh, we got to do this, and everybody was scrambling, and well, what you need to do is you need to take a step back, and the very first step, I think, is discovery. It's about discovery. It's not about jumping right into duplicating various diversity initiatives or setting an agenda, because you don't know what your organization is going through in terms of those items, those things that you have to do. It's about awareness, very first part of the journey. You become aware. So awareness of what types of diversity is it within your organization. And typically self-identifying surveys really help you. But again, creating that safe space where people feel safe to self-identify is important, or even understand what that means, because self-identification could be, are they going to use this against me at some point in my career? Well, that's not the fact. You've got to communicate what you're going to use it for. But it's again, that awareness piece, right? And then not only the organization, but how is it, across your groups and your teams, and And how does it play out for individuals, teams, and the organization as a whole? So just step back and become aware. So get some information. What is your workplace made up of? What is the employment equity piece? What does that mean for your organization? Well, employment equity is about barriers. And, so do you have them? I don't know. Maybe you do an audit. So those are the things that you just take your time so that you're aware and educate yourselves. And then once you know, you can prepare, like Janet said, prepare a plan, move forward, communicate, include those that could be included. It could be focus groups, it could be committees. I'm not a big fan of committees, but but I'd rather have the focus group in these cases. But employment equity may have a compliance piece where you have to have a committee. Get that committee together. And that's the other piece, the legislative piece. Interpret it. Understand what it means for your organization. So I think once you start doing that and you have a really good idea and feel good about moving forward, then you can have those initiatives to close gaps, remove barriers, and of course, don't forget education and training for everybody across the organization. I think that's a good takeaway from today.
I agree. And the only other thing I'll add to that is recognize that each situation is different. And being respectful and consistent is really important. And for me, it's even understanding all those things that Yvonne mentioned. You might make an error, you might make a judgment and think that's the right thing for your organization, but learn. Nothing's always a failure. Take a look at what you've attempted to implement. If it's not working, come back to the drawing board and see what is best for your organization, because each organization is going to approach this differently. And it's okay to have different approaches and different points of view, as long as we're respectful through the process.
I agree, Janet. There's no cookie cutter approach. You have to look within your organization. And once you understand a little bit more and, it makes sense for your organization, try it out. Again, you make a mistake, you learn from your mistake, and you improve.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thanks, Janet. There was a breadth of relevant content shared, and these types of discussions create space for more conversation on this ever-evolving topic. Let's go to our Q&A, as we've had many questions come in over the last half hour. So I'm going to start with, what do people believe are some of the barriers that inhibit diversity and inclusion?
Oh,
that's a good question. Yeah. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Okay, I'm just thinking in terms of the workplace, if you're looking at maybe careers, there's unconscious bias in the workplace. So if you're looking at the employment equity and the designated group, those groups tend to be overlooked. So what barriers are in your processes, in the way you do work, that and I'm not saying you're doing this intentionally, but you've done something a certain way for so long, it hasn't really shown, that are creating barriers for people to be promoted or to be included in different projects or different committees or whatever. There's something that's inhibiting people from feeling that they belong and they can participate. So you need to really look at that as an organization and the culture. Those are, I think, the fundamental pieces that inhibit people from participating and being included. You can't mandate people to come to the party, right? Like as an example, but you want them to feel like they're being invited and to come. It sounds like a great party. I want to go, but you got to really make sure that there's nothing as a barrier. So looking at how you do those things and mandating things may not be a good idea, right? Janet, I don't know if you have anything from like a health and safety perspective, but fundamentally, I'm thinking that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is sometimes from a safety standpoint, we make changes. We implement a change management through a process or a policy, but recognize that it's not always perfect, and you could actually be creating an additional barrier, not intentionally, but because of whatever process you put in place, you may have created an extra barrier that now is prohibiting people from wanting to participate or feeling safe to participate. So just recognize that. I know it's always for safety people, we sort of analyze everything to the upteenth degree, but we don't always take a step back and recognize if we're A, creating a new hazard, or B, creating a barrier. So just keep that in mind as you're developing or doing some type of change management protocol.
Okay, then thank you. The next question, you have already started to talk about removing barriers, but the question is, you might have a bit more to add to it, is what do organizations need to do to be inclusive?
I think they need to listen, right? They need to listen to their employees and their staff and recognize that the way that their business was 10 years ago is not what their business is today. Recognize that those that are coming out of school, university, college, their perspective on life is very different. Recognize generational changes. Recognize that what they think is appropriate is different than what you think is appropriate. And so, again, by creating that culture and that safe space to have these open pieces of dialogue is really key. But on top of that, for me, training is really, really important. It's the starting point to understand terms, pronouns, backgrounds, culture, all of those things, right? So once everybody has the same training, everybody understands the same definitions, and now you've got a starting point. Now you've got a baseline to start developing your program. So for me, I think that's a starting point to understand how your organization can be inclusive. Yvonne?
So it's funny because, with my years in HR, diversity, equity, and inclusion, everybody's response to what are you doing for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And everybody would say, oh, we have potlucks and we celebrate different nationalities. Oh, that's nice, but it's more to that. There's more to just having a celebration. It's good. I'm not going to say it's bad, but when you're looking at that equity piece, sometimes it's very difficult to define what that means. Well, in employment equity, it's about being fair, treating everybody equitably and consistently. So how do you do that? Where are you doing that in your organization? It could be different policies. It could be different processes. So it's about being fair and equitable to each individual in the organization without, as you said, Janet, having a hazard in there. So you're treating everybody, not the same, but they have the equal opportunities. And I think that's the employment equity piece that's sometimes could be challenging.
Thank you, Yvonne. And that's great, because that was the next question. You've actually answered that without me even reading it. It was a comment. It was a question that included the comment. It seems like we tend to forget equity of those three of when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you have talked about that. Thank you. The next question is, what would you recommend as a starting point for inclusivity? And how would you go about getting the other employees to participate?
Another good question. I think, Janet, you've been talking about creating that safe space, and I agree. I think it really starts with if you look at your culture in your organization, is it safe to speak up? Is it safe to be authentic and being your true self? Are you being valued? Are you adding value? All those things I think are really important. And it starts at that kind of, top down, where leaders believe that. And so they will enact on it. Again, like I said, you can't mandate participation, but you create this secure and safe space for it.
I agree. You create the framework. I mean, let's be honest. Not everybody participates at every event in every organization. Why? We don't know why. They may have their own reasons that maybe they don't want to share. But ultimately, you have to make, as an organization, you have to make the effort. You need to develop the framework, and you need to create the space and develop the culture. And so, will you still get 100% participation? No. And that's okay, as long as people are respectful about it, right? Yes. So I thank you for inviting me. I'm not really not going to attend today, but I hope you have a great time and enjoy the event that's happening today. That's the ideal response that you want. That means that you've trained your staff. They understand the importance of the framework. They understand the importance of the program, and they recognize that it might not be something they want to participate in, but they need to be respectful while it's happening. And so, we always have a goal in safety of, zero incidents or the road to zero. But, human nature, we can't dictate. But we can dictate that we have a program, we follow the program, we're consistent with the program. And I think by doing that and following through and executing on these things, it creates a safe space, and it helps to be respectful.
Okay, thank you. Just this next question is closely related to what you were just talking about, Janet. How would you handle an employee not willing to accept inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, those are tough conversations, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, right? Again, not everybody has to agree with everybody. And, we've all done different paths and walks in life. But it doesn't mean that you get an opportunity to tell me how you feel about that, especially if you don't agree with me. Being respectful means, I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you. And when it gets to the point where somebody doesn't want to accept it because it's just something that they can't, or they are starting to create a bit of a toxic environment around that, that's when your program comes into place to address it. It does need to be addressed, like we discussed earlier. By not engaging, you are setting a precedence that it's allowed in the organization. So having those conversations, hey, I noticed you're not participating, or you're not wanting to participate, or you've mentioned a couple of things that you don't want, that other people have interpreted as a bit rude. Can we have a conversation about that? And let me educate you a little bit. And here's what we do at our organization, and here's our expectation. So I think, having all of those components in place help to at least start the conversation and then address those who don't want to participate.
So I was thinking about this and I agree with everything that Janet's saying. That's the correct approach. And the conversations are really important. But again, are you creating that safe space? So one of the things that you may want to start off with, which I think is really good, is just to find out why. Why I'm not forcing you. I want to understand why. And then you may actually find something that is, personal, or that person doesn't feel comfortable, but start that conversation and have the safe space to allow that individual, that employee, to say, well, I'm going to be honest, this is why. And then from there, have that conversation, as Janet said. Again, we can't mandate it, but that's part of creating that space. Just tell me why. Why don't you want to be inclusive? What is going on? Just because that is going to build on your culture, right? So ask, and listen and engage, right?
Thanks. Thanks, Yvonne. This one is probably for you, Yvonne, that you can answer. How can we make job application forms more inclusive?
Ooh. That's a good question. I'm just thinking about the job descriptions that we have, or job applications that we have, which the team has done a really good job of. I wish I had my HR manager with me right now. It's about the language used and focusing on the duties, the responsibilities, all the information that applicants need, obviously, but then having the mechanisms for those that need help or accommodation to apply, and making sure that those accommodations or those items that people need are available. So that's where I think you look at and focus on, make the application forms, the job posting, engaging, and listing everything that an applicant needs, but then giving them the mechanism if they need help. And I guess everybody will see that little we respect the 4 groups and all that little blurby, but it goes beyond just what you put on there. So I think having that language and defining the job and using inclusive language is important. And again, first step, right?
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for at least for one more, maybe. How can I promote equity from the bottom up?
Oh, like from, I don't really, I think we're trying to say equity from,
I think, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking that this might mean from like the floor, from the workers up, as opposed to starting at management, in promoting it from the bottom, figuratively speaking, right?
Right. Engagement. I think engagement and conversations. I mean, there's a tons of opportunities to have toolbox talks, opportunities to have one-on-ones, conversations on the floor, allowing your joint health and safety committee to engage, maybe provide feedback. Hey, I've heard, such and such happening on the floor. I just wanted you to know, I don't think it's a thing right now, but it's something we need to address. Or I heard some derogatory comments. I've addressed it. I want you to know. So I think there's a way to engage that. There's opportunities for, I know this sounds a little bit cliche, but your health and safety boards. I mean, having information available for people to read, understanding, for example, what pronouns are. We talked about the generational gap, and some people are like, well, what does that mean? Like, what exactly does that mean? So if they have the information, instead of asking sort of an embarrassing question, they might be able to read it on the job safety board or your health and safety board or your HR board, where they can actually get a little bit of insight into the information. So for me, it's about engagement. It's about providing opportunities and be innovative. Each organization is so different that, take ideas from your team. If they think something would work for engagement or communication, listen to them. They're on the floor every day. They know what's going on. They know what the tone of the day is or what's happening. So really, for me, that's, I think, a great way to start. Yvonne, I don't know if you have any other ideas.
I agree. That's a really good way. I'm just thinking about the way our own organization approached the values refresh. And what we did was we had a facilitator come in, and we had I know our president, Anne, wanted it to be organic. So she included, it wasn't one of those, here's our values, go forward. It was, we all need to decide what our values are here. And it took a long time to get the values and implement the values and really live by those values. We're still in that journey. But the very first thing that we did was we went to everybody. So you're building from the bottom up, if you will. And that's how we built the values. So do that. Start from the bottom. They're going to have to live by the values. That we're all going to have to behave and respect the values. So start from the bottom up, and along with everything that Janet mentioned. I think that's a good way to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Janet. Thank you both and thank you to everyone with their insightful questions. We're out of time, but if you have further questions, we do encourage you to reach out to our safety info line. The link has been shared in the chat, and this concludes our program for today. Please take a few minutes to fill out the short survey that will open in a tab once the session ends and help us make our future events even better. All registrants today will receive a link to the recording of today's presentation. Look for it in your inbox in the coming days. We hope to see you tomorrow at our midday meditation to wrap up our Safety and Health Week program. The registration link has also been shared in the chat. And before we close, I want to acknowledge our panel of talented and knowledgeable speakers. We thank you, Janet and Yvonne, for your time and sharing. It's appreciated by CCOHS, and I'm sure I can say by our attendees as well. So thank you for joining us, and have a safe afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.